So in this video, we're going to talk about how to practice. Specific to the violin, but the principle should apply to practicing anything. I felt like I needed to make this video because when I get a new student, I always ask them how they practice, and they will invariably say, I play it through a few times from beginning to end. Now, of course, you will still improve by practicing this way, but you'll probably also improve a lot slower than you would if you actually practice properly. One reason is you simply won't get to work on the problem areas as many times as you would if you focused on that area. And if it's a long piece, you'll probably start from the beginning and forget that that was a problem area or a wrong note and go past it again, making the same mistake. So at the end, you've only played the difficult section 3 times in passing rather than taking the time to look and do it properly. So how do you practice properly? Now, I can only speak from my own perspective. So my way isn't the only way or the best way to practice, but just how I like to practice. But I would hazard a guess that your teacher is probably like me. In the lesson, they'll probably point out sections that you should work on. They'll probably also work with you carefully and slowly on that section separately during the lesson. And they're probably expecting you to do it that way at home as well. Often though, students still won't really practice that way at home. And I think it's partly because they don't quite understand the mechanics of practicing. And they also haven't quite developed the discipline yet. Practicing something that you're not good at can be uncomfortable and frustrating, especially if it's difficult. But those are exactly the bits that you need to work on, not the bits that you're already good at. Practicing what you're already good at wouldn't be an efficient use of time. So I'm going to go through with you the main ingredients to practicing in an efficient and helpful way. And I'm also going to answer these most frequently asked questions at the end. How many times should you practice? And how long should you practice a day? Stick around to find out. Before we get there, here are the steps which we are going to go through in detail. Identify the problem, break it up into sections, slow it down, repeat it, speed up a little bit at a time, and put it back together. To illustrate each step, we're going to look at a piece that most people who have learned the violin will have encountered. Song of the Wind from Suzuki Violin Book 1. So first things first, identifying the problem. Like I was saying before, you should be working on the sections that you're having trouble with rather than a section that you're already good at. So I would usually play through the whole piece, or a large section of a piece if it's very long, all the way through once, and during that run through, clock all the bits that I'm having trouble with. And this includes things that are actually difficult, like a really big shift, an awkward double stop, a section with tricky notes where I need to slow down, maybe it's out of tune, but also parts that may be technically correct, but just sounds a bit sloppy. Write notes or circle it with a pencil if you need to. Try to be really objective when you're playing through as well. I always say to my students, when you're at home, you have to be the me. The person who's being picky and pointing out all your little imperfections. Sometimes I'll ask a student, okay, what could have been better about that? And they'll say, oh, I thought that was pretty good. And they're being way too easy on themselves. That's not going to help you improve. So in this piece, the bar that I think all students have trouble with is this one. So look at that bar and figure out why it's hard. At this level, the string change is a challenge, as it's the third finger being used on A string and then E string right away. So you could just play this bar over and over again, but what would be even better would be to practice those two elements separately. So do the bowing first until it's smooth. Work on the timing, and then work on the left hand third finger back and forth until that's smooth. And pay attention too to what's making it difficult. If you're lifting your finger too high, practice going back and forth and keep your finger closer to the string. Once you've got those two elements and you can feel it's improving, then you can put it back together and see how it is. A really important part of practicing is making sure you practice slowly and deliberately. Or you could call it mindfully or carefully. I think it's human nature to want things to be over quickly, especially if it's something you don't really want to do. If I say play something 3 times, my students will often play it quickly, even if I've just said, let's do it slowly at this specific speed. So really properly slow yourself down, and use a metronome if you need to. The point of slowing down is so you can really think about what you're doing, and so you can control your movements. And this is especially important if you've developed a bad habit on the section, or if you're playing wrong notes or the wrong bowing. If you play too fast, your body will just revert back to its muscle memory. You need to do it slowly enough that you can think carefully about what you're doing and actually direct your fingers and arms to do the movements in a specific way. A sure sign that someone is playing by muscle memory and not really thinking about what they're doing is when I ask someone to start from a specific spot and they can't play the notes, and they'll say, oh, let me just start from this other spot and go into it. If you're really thinking about what you're doing and mindfully playing the specific notes and specific bowing, then you should be able to start from anywhere. You shouldn't need to rely on doing a run-up from the notes or bars before. Another sign is if we're trying to practice a bar to fix a mistake and the student keeps repeatedly making the same mistake. That's an indication that you're not playing slowly enough and not paying attention enough to notice what you're doing. If you're actually thinking carefully about what you're doing, there's no reason why you would keep playing a C sharp when it's meant to be a C natural, for example, if we're working only on that one bar and fixing that one note. So how slow do you need to go? I would always try playing at half the speed first. That's a good place to start. And if you're still making mistakes or it's still difficult at that speed, do it even slower. I would say practice at a speed where you can play all the notes in tune without slowing down with the right bowing and the right rhythm. Now we get to the next part of the equation, repetition. My students always groan when I make them do something again, but repetition is important. You don't want to be just able to play something well, you want to be able to play it well consistently. Remember that playing the violin, or any instrument, is a physical activity. You could be the smartest person in the world and understand exactly what you need to play as soon as you look at it, but your fingers and wrists and arms and shoulders all need to be able to do it too. So you need to create that muscle memory, and repetition is how you do it. Think about any athlete. Would a basketball player just make one basket and decide that they've got it now? Would a golfer try out their swing, get one good one, and stop? Of course not. Even professionals at the very top of their game still practice and repeat over and over. That's how they're able to make that shot and score that goal when the pressure is on. They're not doing it by accident, and it's not a fluke. So repeat your section a few times correctly. Usually I would say I try to get it right at least 3 times in a row. If I get it right but then I mess it up, I need to start counting from 1 again. It's an arbitrary number, but I think if I can do it 3 times in a row, then it probably means I've improved it for now and can move on to the next step. Once you've got it slow a few times in a row, you should then try to speed it back up to tempo. But don't go from your super slow practice speed to performance speed all at once. If you do this, I can almost guarantee you that your muscle memory from before you practice would take over, and the same mistakes or sloppiness would come out again. So take that slow section and play it just a little bit faster. Do that a few times. And you can still play it properly with the right notes in tune, clear tone, correct bowing, etc. a few times in a row, then you can speed it up a little bit more and try to get it right at that speed a few times. Keep doing that until you get up to performance speed. If you find that you hit a speed where it's starting to go wrong again, or it's getting messy, go back to practicing at a slower speed again before speeding back up. As one of my teachers said very wisely, play as fast as you can, not as fast as you can't. Now I know it can be hard to make yourself play slowly. So this is where using a metronome can be helpful. This way you can force yourself to follow the tempo of the metronome, and you can speed it up maybe 5 beats per minute at a time as well, to make sure you're not going too fast all at once. Before you move on to the next section, or go back to playing your piece all the way through, link your practice section with what comes right before and right after it. If you don't do this, again, your old muscle memory will probably take over and you will make the same mistakes again. So we need to link the newly practiced section with its surroundings. I would usually do 1 bar before and 1 bar after, but if it's a particularly difficult section, I might even add just 1 note that comes next first. Then when I'm confident with that, I can add another note and build on it until I have a couple of bars. Then I can add the notes that are before the section until I have both what comes before and what comes after. It depends on what you're working on, so make your own judgment as to how best to put it all back together. Once you've done your bar before and bar after, and your practice section is still intact, and it hasn't reverted back to its previous unimproved version, I would probably expand it a bit again and do the whole phrase. You may find that the first time you put it back together in the phrase, you will play the section wrong again. That's normal, because that's what your brain has been doing this whole time. That's muscle memory. Your body is following the previous pattern that it's used to. I find that it's also easy to feel like, okay, I've practiced it, it's fine now, and not actually really be thinking as carefully when you're playing through it again as you did when you practiced. So focus just as much during the playthrough as when you practiced. Think through all the same steps so that you don't revert back to the previous mistakes or sloppiness or whatever it is that you were working on. Now do this whole process with the next section you need to work on. Then when you're done all your sections, go back to the very beginning and play the whole piece or section of the piece again. If you've practiced carefully and mindfully, it should have improved in less time than it would have taken you if you had just played it from beginning to end over and over. Clock any parts that still need work and make a note of them for your next practice session. And then next time, do it all over again. You'll likely find that when you do a playthrough the next day, some of the improvement will have dialed back a bit, and some of the old bad habits have crept back in. You can't expect to do one practice session and fix all of your problems. That's not how learning works. So go through all the same steps again, but you should find that the second time you work on something, you'll be able to get to the same level in a shorter amount of time than when you worked on it the first time. Or you'll be able to level up and sound even better, cleaner, more in tune, whatever it is you're working on. It may feel like it takes a long time or is a bit tedious, but if you put in the care and attention it takes to practice mindfully, I promise you it will actually improve faster than if you play from beginning to end repeatedly without focusing on problem areas. And remember that everything you work on now will help you in the future. Working on a string change will help all future string changes. Working on a shift will help all future shifts. Spending 15 minutes working on one bar will make all of your future playing better. So it's time well spent. And when the next time you encounter the same problem, you won't need to work on it as many times. You'll already be further along in the process. What if it doesn't get any better? If it's a really tricky bit, you may simply have to break it down to smaller and smaller sections. Have another think about why this section is giving you trouble. Maybe you didn't realize that it's actually the bowing making it unclear and have been focusing on your left hand. Maybe it's just a transition between two specific notes. Use your own judgment as to what is helpful and don't try to rush it. Check to see if you're actually practicing it slowly. A lot of the times I tell my students to play a section and repeat it slowly, and they'll play it at the same fast speed. Or they'll repeat and start to speed up. I've said this a couple of times, but to check yourself, playing with a metronome can be really helpful. So you can really make sure you're slowing down, enough that you can play clearly and without mistakes. Think of other ways to practice the section. If you've just been playing it slowly, maybe try going back and forth between each note. Seek out a scale in the key of your piece if you're struggling with finger placement. Be creative and think of how you can practice that will help you solve the problem. If the section was getting better and then starts getting worse again as you're working on it, you may need to go back a step and practice again. Maybe you moved on to the next step before it was quite solid enough, or sped up too much too early. Make sure you're confident in what you're doing and can play it consistently and reliably before moving on to the next step again. If you're still not improving, I would suggest just taking a break. It's likely that your attention and concentration are waning. Research has shown that most adults can only concentrate on a task for around 20 minutes. So if you find yourself starting to lose focus, either put your violin down and come back to it later, or move on to another section instead of practicing with the same one. You'll probably find that when you come back to it later, that a fresh mind can do better work. If you've done all the steps, you've broken it down, played it very slowly, and practiced multiple times, and what you're working on still isn't improving, it may simply be that the piece or the section is a bit too difficult for your current skill level. If you think this may be the case, I would put the piece aside and try again when you've acquired the skills that you're currently lacking. If you're struggling with double stops, for example, seek out some etudes that work on double stops, practice some scales, or work in a piece that includes double stops but is a bit simpler. Then when you go back to your more difficult piece, you'll be better equipped to tackle it and it'll be less frustrating for you. Don't make mistakes. Obviously, we're never trying to make mistakes, but if you're playing a wrong note, for example, really try when you're practicing to never allow yourself to play that wrong note. It would be better to pause and think and play the right note than to barge full steam ahead and play the wrong one. Remember that repetition creates muscle memory and strengthens neural pathways. So if you repeat a wrong note or a wrong bowing or a bad shift, you are practicing that mistake and making it more and more likely for you to make that mistake again the next time. Remember that bad habits are a lot harder to break than good habits are to form. So try not to create and entrench a bad habit in the first place, from the very beginning right when you're learning a piece. If you've already made a mistake in learning a piece, Practice that section as early in the learning process as possible so that you fix that mistake and spend less time repeating it the wrong way. There are some students who are quite diligent at practicing every day, but don't pay enough attention, and at the end of a week have already practiced multiple times with the wrong notes, with the wrong rhythm, or the wrong bowing. A week's worth of practicing it like this always takes weeks and weeks of extra practicing to undo. So if you catch yourself or your teacher lets you know of a mistake, fix it as soon as possible. When you're practicing sections, always try to use the same bowing as you will be playing with in the final version of your piece. If it's an up-down, for example, and you are having trouble with crossing strings, it's not going to do much good for you to practice going down-up instead. It will help you with your bowing in general, but it's not going to help you with a specific problem you're working on. Of course, if it's a really tricky bit, you may want to play with separate bows to begin with, regardless of any slurs or other bowing that's written. But once you've gotten the hang of the notes, make sure to practice it with the bowing that you will be playing with in the final version before you put it all back together. If you're playing by yourself, you may not notice that you're playing a little out of tune, or there's a wrong note, or something that's a little unclear, or you're speeding up. Sometimes you just need a little distance, and sometimes it's because putting attention on the act of playing simply means that you can't also put all of your attention on listening. So I would suggest that every once in a while, you record yourself and listen back or watch back. You'll be able to judge yourself more objectively, and you'll notice things that you maybe can't notice when you're actually playing. I'm guilty of being a little too easy on myself sometimes. I'll play something and think, well, that sounded pretty good. But if you really want to improve, you need to be hard on yourself. Don't let yourself get away with being sloppy. Be as picky as your teacher would be. Take your practice as seriously as you would a lesson. And remember that even if it sounds fine, there is always room for improvement. So here's the answer to the most frequently asked question. How much are you supposed to practice? I had a student whose previous teacher would assign him 20 times per piece per week. The next week, if he hadn't done them all, he would add them to his count for the next week. So by the time he got to me, he was meant to play his piece 144 times that week. I think we can all agree that this is a totally meaningless way of practicing. If you've been paying attention to this video, if you didn't practice mindfully and with focus, you could have played it 144 times and still be making all the same mistakes. Plus, why wouldn't he just lie? So the answer to how many times you need to practice something is as many times as it takes. If it takes you 40 times of repeating something before you can play it consistently and reliably, then you need to do it 40 times. If you can do it after 5 times, then move on. There's no sense in making yourself practice more when you can leave it and work on something else. That's why I like to do it 3 times in a row to a good level before moving on. It may take you 3 times in total to get there, or 20. Don't be focused on the number, be focused on improving the problem you're working on. Now, how long should your practice sessions be? One of my teacher friends suggests a practice session that's as long as your lesson, and I feel like that's a pretty good general guide. But if I'm being honest, practice can be really hard to fit in, especially if you've never played an instrument before and you're not used to making it a part of your routine, or you've got tons of after-school activities, or you're an adult and you also have to deal with all sorts of life admin as well as work full-time. So usually what I tell people is, aim for 5 minutes. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to a new student, especially if they're an adult, and they've said to me, I really want to practice an hour a day. And I always tell them that's great. If you can do an hour, that would be amazing. But aim for 5 minutes first. They always insist on an hour. Then invariably the next week they'll come back and they'll say, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't practice at all. That's why I say to aim for 5 minutes. If you think you need a whole hour, you'll think, oh, I don't have quite enough time right now, I'll do it later. Next day comes along, same thing happens. Before you know it, it's next week already. If you aim for 5 minutes though, mentally it's a much smaller commitment and feels much more doable. And if after 5 minutes you feel like you're gaining some momentum, you can do some more. Then you might find it actually turns into 10, 15, 20 minutes of good focused practice. And even if you really only do 5 minutes, at least you've done 5 minutes. 5 minutes a day is much better than none at all. Then, as you get used to having practice as a part of your life, you can aim for longer. But remember that most people don't concentrate for longer than 20 minutes anyway. So feel free to grab bits of time whenever you can. Sometimes I'll have 15 minutes before students going to arrive, which is not really enough time to do anything else, but a really good amount of time for me to work on some scales or one specific section of a piece. Make it a part of your routine. Sometimes the student will come to the lesson, and when I ask why they didn't manage to get any practice in, they'll say, "Well, I forgot." I totally understand this. I always plan to work out, for example, and after a few days will realize that I haven't done any working out at all. If you're new to playing an instrument, a really good way of making sure you're getting your practice sessions in is making it a part of your daily or weekly life. Just like most of us brush our teeth at the same time every day, try to do your practicing at the same time every day. Maybe it's right after you get home from school, or right after dinner, or in the morning before you go to work. Just like working out, if you make it a part of your life, it'll be a lot easier to stick to it and to remember to do it. If you have a really busy life and can't commit to it daily, write it in as a session during the week. If you always have dance classes at 3:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, pick a few days and times and make that same commitment to your practicing and put it in your calendar. I also usually leave my violin case open so that it's front of mind, and I can quickly pick it up and play a little if I have the time. Removing small barriers like that can really help you make sure to get some more playing time in. To borrow a marketing term, you need to remove the friction from the decision-making process to push you to take the desired action. Of course, even with the best of intentions, sometimes life gets in the way of practicing. And just like working out, that's okay. Just get in a good session when you can. But if you know in advance that you'll have a busy week and will only be able to practice once or twice, try to practice as soon after your lesson as you can. That's when the things you've worked on in your lesson will still be freshest in your mind, and you can solidify anything you've done or learned. If you wait until right before your next lesson, you'll have forgotten a lot of what you've done and lost some of the progress that you have already made. If at all possible though, a few minutes every day is better than one binge practice session at the end of the week. I like to think of it like eating. You can't just not eat all week and try to eat a week's worth of food all in one go. You also can't eat a week's worth of food and then hope it will last you until the next week. Your body needs time to process and digest. Not to mention doing it all at once wouldn't even be physically possible and could kill you. Practicing is the same. Doing some every day gives your brain and your body time to process so that you can keep building on the muscle memory you've developed the day before and improving your technique. My friends who binge practiced variously ended up with blisters, cuts on their fingers, and tendinitis. Get a practice mute. If you find it difficult to practice when the rest of your family is around, or roommates, or you only get home very late at night and don't want to disturb your neighbors, then a really good investment is a practice mute. Not only will it help if you feel self-conscious about making mistakes or unpleasant sounds as a beginner, but it'll also help you protect your ears if you do a lot of practicing. Your violin is right next to your ear, and even if you're not playing very loudly, sustained noise still does damage. There are wooden, rubber, and metal mutes. I usually use a rubber one because it's the most comfortable. Wood ones tend to stick out too much for my liking, and while metal ones really dampen the sound by a huge amount, I find they tend to vibrate off as you're playing, so you keep having to adjust it, which is a bit annoying, not to mention being very heavy. But try them out for yourself and see which one you like best. And that's about it. I hope I've managed to impress upon you the importance of practicing. It's actually the majority of your learning. It may seem like the lesson is where you learn, but as a teacher, I only get half an hour, 45 minutes, or an hour with you. Over an entire week, that's nothing. It almost all depends on you. You can have the best teacher in the world, but if you don't practice, you're still not going to improve. Or you may improve a little bit every time you work on things in the lesson, but your progress will be very slow. Much, much slower than if you actually dedicated yourself to practicing on a regular basis. If you have any questions or any practicing tips of your own, let me know in the comments.